Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook. Harmonious World is an independent podcast inspired by a Quincy Jones quote. Imagine what a harmonious world it would be if everyone shared a little of what they're good at. Here, I chat with musicians and those with an interest in music to get them to share what they're good at. For this episode, I'm joined by composer and pianist Doug Wyatt. His new album is Days of Gypsy Nights. What you're listening to now is Afraid to Love, which is taken from Days of Gypsy Nights. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation with Doug Wyatt. So hi.
Nice to meet you, Hilary.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure. I'm really enjoying listening to Days of Gypsy Nights. It's a lovely album, Doug.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. So I started this episode with, because the joy of having your own podcast is you can play whatever music you like.
Sure.
And so to introduce our discussion, I played Afraid to Love.
Mm-hmm.
I partly like that because it starts with your piano. Can you tell me about when you wrote these tracks?
Yeah, I wrote them over a period of about 5 years, except for one, which I wrote in 1989 and resuscitated. But this one was a bit of an aberration in that I hadn't really written anything like it in a really long time. I was inspired by my friend, the saxophonist, Michael Rosen. I'd heard one of his albums recently. And I just had this idea that I wanted to write something as a vehicle for Michael. And so from the very beginning, I conceived of it as something that would have a saxophone melody and kind of evoke the Great American Songbook of jazz standards.
Oh, that's really interesting because it definitely does that. It does it really beautifully. And in fact, some of the songs I almost felt like, have I heard these before? And I think that in a good way, there's a sort of,
Sure.
I don't know, not exactly familiarity, but there's
Mm-hmm.
something about the way they are structured and the way he's got a lovely sax sound, hasn't he?
Yes, he does. Yeah, he's such a great player.
Yeah.
We played together and wrote a bunch of music together in the early 1980s, and then didn't really play together again until this project. Um, and I think we're going to keep working together. I've recorded 2 more pieces with him this spring in New York, and I think that's going to be the launching pad for my next record.
Oh, brilliant. So since we're talking about him, let's talk about
Sure.
the other people you've got on this album as
Yeah.
well.
Hmm.
So how did you choose them?
Well, so Tim Reppert, who plays bass on Afraid to Love, Iroquois, and the title track, um, he was the leader of a jazz group I was in high school. Um, and he and Michael and I are mutual friends. So uh, it was kind of natural to work with him. He also helped a lot with the engineering of the record. Um, and he brought in Michael Weldrup to play drums. He'd also been in our high school jazz band. Um, who else? So Marcello Pelletieri, who plays drums on a few tracks, he came in. He was a recommendation of Michael Rosen's, um, as was Giuseppe Bassi and Francesco Ponticelli, who are Italian double bassists. So 2 tracks were recorded with them in Italy.
Right, because that was the other thing I was going to ask you
Hmm.
was where was all of this recorded? So it wasn't just, let's go into a studio for a day and get everything done.
No, it was kind of a long saga. So Afraid to Love and Iroquois were recorded in Boston. Um, then let's see what happened next. Then I went to Italy and recorded Mythica with Michael and Francesco. Then a year ago this week, actually, Michael, Marcello, and Giuseppe recorded uh, As I Am, As I Dream to Be in Italy. And I called in to that session from Nashville, where I was recording all the string quartets that week last year. Um, then I recorded all of my piano parts at home, mostly over the course of last summer on the ones that weren't ensemble tracks, and yeah, that's most of it.
Yeah, I think modern technology is a wonderful thing because it allows you to play with people who you don't always all have to be in the same place at the same time.
Although it is nice when you are, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so my next question was going
hmm
to be, how are you performing these live, or are you?
Yeah, the answer to that is that's on top of my mind right now. I did have the mix engineer, Michael Whalen, who's also an artist of his own. He made some versions of the mixes that just were everything except the piano. And I did a little house party, and it was fun to really get inside the music again and learn it all. But I'm thinking bigger now, and I've been talking to some musicians here in San Francisco and trying to line something up, probably for I'm looking at February next year.
Excellent. Okay, at this point, I want to play a particular track. And the reason I want to play this particular track is A, I really like the title, and B, I like the strings on it. They're little big sound strings. So the track is the pseudo iterative. I love that concept because it's not it's so iterative implies a repetition, but pseudo
hmm
implies that you think there's a repetition, but actually there isn't.
Yes.
There's a
Yes.
change. It's a it's a great concept, but I love the word anyway. So let's before we talk about it, let's just play a little bit of that track.
Okay.
So first of all, why the title? Does the title have a relevance to the content of the music?
Well, the title came from a book by Kim Stanley Robinson, the science fiction author. And in this story, you have this guy, the main character is taking these long, like multi-month voyages on a spaceship. And he talks about how every one of these spaceships is different, and you end up having to reconstruct your life and build a whole new routine that's that adapts to where you are. And you know, he gets into the philosophy of the pseudo iterative in some more detail, but this is what I felt during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we had to, you know, we were sort of in these isolated places for long periods of time, and we had to figure out how to restructure our daily routines around it. That was the period that this piece of music came out of.
Ah, right. And why strings? Why have you added strings to this one and to several of the other tracks?
Well, originally, I was writing for piano and string quartet only. Uh, this was something I'd been wanting to do for about 20 years, and well, 20 years now, 15 years then, and had just never gotten the right spark to get started. But then something clicked. It was right around the time my now wife and I started dating. Uh, and I felt this urge to put this into action. And I wrote a piece that ended up being dedicated to her. It's called Katie's Spring. Um, and then somewhere around the middle of, after I'd written maybe 4 or 5 of these string quartet plus piano pieces, I just started using other sounds and it became natural to bring in other players. And that's where all the group pieces came from. Um, but yeah, the string quartet is there on all but one of the tracks in one form or another. And it's kind of the glue, I think.
Yeah. But just as the saxophone is the glue as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you enjoy writing for string quartets? I think it's quite a complex thing to do to work out the different voicings and the range and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So back when I lived in Ithaca, New York, uh, where Cornell University is, I became friends with David Borden, who was a minimalist composer. He used synthesizers, and he had the world's first performing synthesizer ensemble. It was called Mother Mallard, and um, he had been a friend of Bob Moog's and visited his studio right outside of Ithaca, and that's how he, got his gear and got the band together. But anyways, David was he composes in this very um, intricate way. He had the idea that every part makes sense on its own, and they combine to create, a whole being greater than the sum of its parts. But this is a really old concept, counterpoint, right? The idea that every voice has separate lines of interest, and it just struck me writing for string quartet that it was a great way to kind of put that philosophy into action of exploring the different ways you can make these 4 independent voices interact.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Very interesting. I mean, I, I love the whole composition process between, when you've got two hands on a piano,
Hmm.
because there's so many different lines going on at once. You've got 10 fingers going sometimes,
Sure. Yeah.
because I'm a sax player, so we
Uh-huh.
tend to do one line there's one line.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I love those sort of thinking through the complexity of those things. Where did your musical influences come from and your musical background?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a musical household. I like to say I've been playing piano since I could reach the keys. Um, and I took classical piano lessons, but at some point in the 70s, I was probably 12 or 13, it became more interesting to try to figure out how to play Elton John's songs by ear. Um, and uh, and that kind of led to jazz and progressive rock, more complex music. Um, and then I was in bands. We played jazz, and at some point, I realized that I wasn't going to make a living playing music, nor did I really want to, because I saw the people trying to do that really struggling and getting frustrated. And so I became a computer programmer, and that's my day job. But I did manage to kind of converge things because I became a specialist in writing music software. Um, the
Ah.
like when you use GarageBand on your Mac, you're actually using parts of the system that I worked on.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting because I use that all the time. So
Uh-huh.
that's weird. I mean, not weird.
Small world.
It's a very small world. You're on my computer. That's brilliant. I love it when musicians have other things, either that they're doing to earn a living, or just they're interested in, or
Sure. Yeah.
I think it just makes us all more creative and more inspired because we've got more inspiration coming in.
Yeah. It's nice to have these other things, like for me, hiking tends to bring it out. It's just immersion in nature and being away from computers and
Yeah.
um,
I will make sure that my audience have got links to where they can find out about these hopefully the gigs for next year. So I will put those into the show notes.
That sounds great. I appreciate it.
No, that's great. Okay, well, it's really good to talk to you, Doug. Thank you so much.
You too, Hillary. Take care.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation with Doug Wyatt. What you're listening to now is As I Am, As I Dream to Be from Days of Gypsy Nights. So thank you for joining me once more for Harmonious World. I hope you have a really, really good week. Please do follow some of the links in the show notes, and remember to share, rate and review this episode and listen to loads more. There are many, many out there. I've interviewed some amazing people and it's well worth having a look at the back catalogue. Thanks for joining me once more for Harmonious World. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.